The sky over the red plains of Daelus 9 shimmered with iridescent clouds, a trick of the planet's twin suns and its oddly dense atmosphere. The air was breathable by human standards, thin, dry, and tinged with ozone, but the field trip organizers had insisted on full suits just in case of sudden shifts in pressure or particle storms. Alden Zeller adjusted the collar of his environment suit and squinted up at the sky. "Feels like Utah in August," he muttered, then glanced down at the small group of students he was shepherding. 3 aliens stood in a loose cluster, heads tilted in that curious way they did when they were attempting, poorly, to understand Earth metaphors. The 4th student, a tall, vaguely reptilian being named Vetch, had wandered off to inspect a ridge of rock formations that looked like wind-sculpted coral. "Vetch," Alden called, "stay within line of sight. I don't want to radio for a search team because you found something shiny again." Vetch lifted one long arm and waved lazily. "I am not lost. I am observing terrain inconsistencies compared to satellite renderings. It is important." "Area. Well, so is my ability to sleep through the night without filling out a missing persons report." The other 3 students, Zeln, a bioluminescent species with translucent skin, Orta, a short, stocky being with 2 sets of eyes, and Ket, who always smelled faintly like aloe, watched Alden with a mixture of amusement and skepticism. The kind of skepticism that had been growing ever since the cultural exchange program began. "Humans are squishy," Orta had once remarked in a seminar. "Your bones break under mild pressure, your skin tears easily, and you require sleep for nearly a third of your cycle." Zeln had chimed in, "And your cardiovascular system is laughably inefficient. You can't even regrow lost tissue unless it's minor." Alden had shrugged. "Yeah, well, we're still here, aren't we?" But that didn't seem to impress them much. Now, trudging across the craggy terrain of Daelus 9, Alden could still feel their eyes on him, watching, evaluating, probably wondering how long he'd last in a real crisis. He didn't mind. He'd been a paramedic before joining the interspecies education program, had done a few years in the ER before that. He was used to the judgment that came before the screaming. Vetch suddenly let out a strangled sound, something between a hiss and a gasp. Alden turned fast. "Vetch, what happened?" The tall alien had disappeared behind one of the outcroppings. The sound of sliding rock followed, then a heavy, unmistakable thud. Alden dropped his pack and ran. He found Vetch crumpled in a narrow crevice, wedged awkwardly between 2 jagged slabs of brittle stone. One leg was twisted at a sickening angle, the lower portion buried under a slab that had clearly given way beneath him. A thin trickle of dark purple fluid seeped from his thigh. "Don't move," Alden said instantly, kneeling beside him. "Can you feel your foot?" Vetch blinked, alarm flickering across his normally impassive face. "I feel heat, pressure, but not movement." "All right. I need to assess the bleeding. Stay with me." Zeln, Orta, and Ket caught up seconds later. Zeln recoiled at the sight of the injury. Orta looked pale. "We is compromised," Orta said. "We should call the retrieval shuttle." 30 minutes, Alden replied, pulling medical shears from his thigh pouch. "He doesn't have that long. Not if that artery's been nicked." "You are not a surgeon," Ket said. "No," Alden said, slicing through the suit material on Vetch's leg. "But I've kept people alive long enough to get to one." The leg was mangled. Alden could see bone exposed through the torn tissue, and the bleeding was slow but persistent. Dark blood pooled in the folds of the suit. He pulled a compact scanner from his kit and ran it over the leg. The screen lit up with a skeletal map, fracture-confirmed compound with bone displacement. There was also a tear in what the exchange program's medical database had labeled the primary circulatory filament, the alien equivalent of a femoral artery. Alden's stomach tightened. "You're bleeding out internally." "I do not feel pain," Vetch said, voice tight. "Good. You're going to." He reached for a sealed pouch in his medkit and unfolded a trauma wrap. "Zeln, hand me the compression gel." Zeln hesitated. "Now." Zeln moved, fumbling slightly, and passed Alden the vial. Alden applied the gel directly to the wound, watching as it expanded and momentarily slowed the bleeding. Not a fix, just a delay. The bone would have to be realigned before he could stabilize the leg. He checked the scanner again, quickly cross-referencing with the database. Alien physiology wasn't his specialty, but the system had enough onboard data to guide him through. Orta leaned in. "You will manipulate the bone? Without anesthesia?" Alden didn't look up. "He'll go into shock if I don't. And we don't have anesthetics that work on his species. So yeah, I'm going to set the bone. And it's going to suck." He looked at Vetch. "Ready?" Vetch nodded once. Alden took a breath, braced himself, and pulled. The scream that tore out of Vetch was raw and guttural, and for a moment Alden thought he'd passed out. But the leg straightened, the scanner confirmed alignment. He applied a rigid cast from the emergency supply kit and used the second trauma wrap to cover the wound. He could feel the other students watching him, silent now, the judgment gone. Alden wiped sweat from his brow. "Zeln, prep a beacon for the shuttle. Ket, monitor his vitals. Orta, open the med canopy in my pack. We need to keep him stable and covered until help gets here." They moved, quickly and without argument. 37 minutes later, the retrieval shuttle touched down. The field medics took over, lifting Vetch into a stretcher fitted for his species. One of the medics looked at Alden and gave a short nod. "Field notes say you're not certified for alien surgery." "I'm not," Alden said, standing slowly. "But I've been certified in staying alive." Later that night, back at the base compound, Orta stood awkwardly in the hallway outside Alden's quarters. "I reviewed the footage from your body cam," Orta said. "You stabilized him in 11 minutes. "Should have been 10, Alden replied, peeling off the last of his undersuit. "You are less fragile than we assumed." Alden leaned against the door frame. "We're breakable, sure, but we don't give up easy." Orta stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I would like to study your emergency response methods. With your permission?" Alden smiled. "Yeah, come by tomorrow. Bring a notebook." As Orta walked away, Alden let out a long breath and sat down heavily on the edge of his bed. His hands were still shaking. The next morning brought a brittle stillness to the compound, the kind that settled in after any near disaster. The air recyclers hummed overhead, and the hallways smelled faintly of sterilizing mist and warm nutrient broth from the communal kitchens. Alden sat alone in the infirmary's side room, elbows on the stainless table, rubbing his temples. He'd been up for nearly 20 hours, and his body was beginning to protest. He didn't hear the door behind him hiss open. "You didn't document the vascular seal timing." Orta stepped in without waiting for a response. He carried a slim tablet under one arm and wore an expression that hovered somewhere between determination and disbelief. "Because I was trying to keep him alive," Alden said. "Had a choice between typing notes and plugging a hole the size of a walnut in his leg. Guess which one won?" Orta placed the tablet on the table. "You used a human-derived compression wrap. It bonded to his dermal layer in under 6 seconds. That's not supposed to happen." "No, it's not," Alden said. "But his blood was high in calcium ions. The adhesive in the wrap is calcium reactive. It was meant for human clotting factors, but it overperformed in his case." Orta's eyes blinked out of sync for a moment. "You made a chemical compatibility determination in under a minute, without a cross-species chart." "I guessed." "That is not a methodology. As it happens, it's when you don't have time to run a simulation." Orta sat across from him, slow and deliberate. "You could have killed him." Alden leaned back. "Was already dying. I just slowed it down long enough for someone better equipped to take over." Silence stretched, filled only by the faint whine of the overhead lights. Orta tapped the tablet, bringing up a 3D scan of Vetch's leg from the shuttle's post-trauma report. "You realigned his tibial structure within 1.8 degrees of anatomical standard. Did you know his species' bones are layered with interstitial membranes? I figured something was flexing that shouldn't have been. I could feel it shift when I pulled, so I stopped just short of locking it straight." He rubbed at his jaw. Felt like trying to reattach a wet tent pole. Orta looked down at the scan again. How do you humans function like this? Without full anatomical overlays, without a neural link, you relied entirely on contact diagnostics and instinct. We're not built with a lot of safety nets, Alden said, so we improvise. After a moment, Orta stood. I want to observe your emergency drills. Closely. You sure? Alden asked. It's mostly me getting covered in fake blood and yelling at people for forgetting tourniquets. I am very sure. Later that cycle, the training bay was cleared for a simulation. Orta arrived early, already equipped with a data band on each wrist and an ocular overlay that recorded biometric readings. He stood near the wall, motionless, while Alden prepped the scenario. All right, Alden said, glancing over the setup. This one's a shuttle decompression trauma. We've got a synthetic leg rigged with a pressure fracture, simulated internal bleeding, and a false pulse monitor. I'll give you vitals as I work. That won't be necessary, Orta replied. I will record your responses in real time. Suit yourself. He hit the start control. The dummy on the table jolted slightly as the scenario initiated. A slow, rhythmic beeping began. Pulse elevated. Pressure dropping, Alden muttered, sliding on gloves. Fractures in the femur analog, no external bleeding yet. That means we've got internal pooling. He made a small incision with the trainer's scalpel, enough to expose the tubing inside. Artificial blood began to leak into the compartment. Orta shifted slightly. You opened the site before confirming the vessel location. Alden didn't look up. I knew where it was. I've seen enough of these. But this model is non-human. Doesn't matter, they all bleed the same direction. He reached for a clamp and sealed off the tubing. The beeping steadied. Problem is, he said, you can't always wait for a full map. Sometimes you only get seconds to decide, so you try something. And if it doesn't work, you try something else, fast. Orta recorded silently, then finally said, your approach is chaotic. Yep, but effective. Sometimes, Alden said, and sometimes it's just lucky. The simulation ended. The dummy went still. A faint chime signaled success. Orta approached the table and examined the incision. The vascular clamp was placed within millimeters of the rupture site. I've had practice. You used no visual targeting, no sensor overlay. Nope. You depend entirely on your hands. Alden peeled off his gloves. And my ears, and my gut, and whatever part of my brain still remembers what a ruptured artery sounds like when it's hitting a bulkhead. Orta stared at him. You are not what we expected. Alden gave him a tired look. You say that like it's a compliment. I believe it is. That evening, Alden sat on the edge of his bunk again, a warm gel pack pressed to the back of his neck. His shoulders ached. Not from the simulation, but from the tension of holding everything together since the accident. The compound's lights dimmed for night cycle, casting the corridors in soft amber. He was about to lie down when the door chimed. Zelm stood outside, flickering faintly under the low light. I watched the simulation, she said. Your technique was unelegant. Thanks, Alden replied. I aim for not dead more than elegant. But you have no exosuit, no dermal plating. Your kind is not genetically reinforced, and yet you perform trauma intervention with only your native tools. Hands, he said. They're called hands. Hands, she repeated, as if testing the word. I wish to understand how such vulnerability results in survival. Alden sighed. You know, I used to think the same thing. I've seen people live through falls they shouldn't have. I've seen someone survive a rebar through the chest. I've also seen people die from paper-thin cuts on the wrong day. Zelm tilted her head. Then survival is random? No, he said. It's just uneven. But we're stubborn. That helps. She moved closer. I have begun recording your strain's interventions. I wish to create a comparative study on medical resilience. Knock yourself out. I do not understand that phrase. Don't worry. You will. Zell turned to leave, then paused. Vetch has regained partial sensation. He asked if he could return to class. Alden raised an eyebrow. He's not even off the pain suppressants. He said you would understand. Alden let out a short laugh. Yeah, I do. As the door closed, he leaned back against the wall. His neck still throbbed, his feet ached, his head buzzed from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But for the first time since the field trip, he felt something settle in his chest that wasn't just fatigue. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the slow, steady unraveling of the myth that humans were only as strong as their skin. The mess hall was unusually quiet for mid-shift. Normally, the alien students filtered in and out with their trays of reconstituted proteins and mineral broths, exchanging clipped phrases and data bursts. But today, they sat in small, hushed clusters, glancing occasionally toward the far corner, where Alden nursed a lukewarm cup of something that passed for coffee. Vetch sat across from him in a mobility brace that hummed faintly as it adjusted to his posture. His leg, now encased in an exosplint, was propped on a low stool. Several pressure sensors glowed softly along the sides, indicating active neural feedback. I have reviewed the shuttle's internal logs, Vetch said, tapping lightly at the console implanted in his forearm. Had you not intervened before the medics arrived, I would have lost at least 43% of lower limb function, possibly more depending on clot formation. Alden didn't look up. I was aiming for 42, so I guess I overshot. Vetch blinked once. You're jesting. Sort of. He took a sip, winced. Mostly just trying to keep your species from banning field trips. You did not have the clearance to perform invasive procedures on an alien anatomy. No, I didn't, Alden said. But you didn't have the clearance to fall into a rock crevice either, so I figured we were even. Vetch paused. I do not understand how you assessed the damage without a scan calibrated to my physiology. I didn't. I used the scanner I had, figured out what didn't belong, and worked from there. Pressure patterns told me what was swelling, temperature gradients told me what was bleeding. After that, it was just puzzle solving. You approximated a circulatory map by touch. Alden leaned back. When I was in paramedic school, they used to make us practice on mannequins with blood flow systems. Realistic ones. If you pinched the wrong vessel or clamped the wrong point, it'd simulate a drop in vital signs. You learned fast. Across the room, Orta hovered near the protein dispensers, watching the conversation with quiet intent. He eventually crossed over and set a small tray down beside them. You are being reviewed by the Interspecies Education Board, he said without preamble. There are questions about your methods. Let me guess, Alden said. Why did the squishy human stick his hands inside a student's thigh without proper licensing? Orta didn't blink. That is an almost exact phrasing, yes. Vetch looked between them. The action was necessary. It should not be penalized. Doesn't really matter what we think, Alden said. Rules are rules. I get it. You don't want humans improvising surgery on people when they're technically only here to teach planetary geology. You were not teaching geology, Orta corrected. You were assigned to field operations logistics. I was also the only one carrying a trauma wrap. A small pause followed. Then Orta sat down. I have submitted a secondary report, he said. It outlines your decision-making process, your field performance, and the limitations of your equipment. I included a recommendation for cross-species emergency protocol training. Alden raised an eyebrow. You're trying to get me certified? I'm trying to prevent future hesitation in similar scenarios, Orta said. We cannot afford to question competence during a crisis. You're not worried about the precedent? Alden asked. Letting humans poke around in alien biology? I am concerned with outcomes. Orta folded his hands. And you produced a favorable one. Vetch lifted his console again. I have also submitted a request to establish a new module in the practical resilience curriculum. It will be based on your intervention. With your permission, of course. Alden blinked. You want me to teach alien med school? I believe you called it figuring things out before someone dies. A chuckle escaped him. He rubbed a hand down his face. You realize I'm not qualified to teach anything beyond basic trauma response. You are qualified to demonstrate, Ortha said. The students can learn the regulations elsewhere. They rarely learn instinct. Zeln approached the table, holding a data crystal. She didn't sit. I've compiled the neural imaging from Vetch's pain response during the fracture alignment, she said. It has been analyzed and cross-referenced with your muscle tension at the time. Alden looked up. That's a weird hobby. It's already been submitted to the board. They found your micro-adjustments during the procedure to be within a tolerance range typically associated with neuro-aided surgeons. I didn't use a neural link. It is what makes it notable. Ortza gestured toward Zeln. She believes the board will reverse the disciplinary motion. They were more concerned with recklessness than with result. Well, Alden said. That's fair. It was reckless. You calculated risk based on limited data and acted within ethical intent, Zeln replied. Still reckless. Vetch adjusted his brace. Would you have preferred I bled quietly while awaiting authorized personnel? No, Alden said. I just didn't think I'd be explaining it over lunch. Your actions are being used to update the field protocols for several species, Zeln added, particularly regarding what constitutes acceptable intervention when time is a limiting factor. Alden leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let me ask you something. You've got species here that can regrow limbs, some that don't even need blood. Why does a human reaction rate matter so much to you? Orta tilted his head. Because your species continues to survive in conditions we consider biologically untenable, you succeed in environments where others would shut down. That is worth studying. It's not always pretty, Alden said, or methodical. Neither is survival, Orta replied. An alert tone sounded from the mess hall display. A shuttle had arrived early, most likely bringing replacements for the next rotation of instructors. A few students stood and began clearing their trays. Zeln placed the data crystal on the table. The board will issue their decision tomorrow, but I believe the outcome is now certain. Alden turned the crystal over in his hand. It was warm from her grip. Well, he said, at least now I know what to do if someone else falls into a pit. Vetch stood slowly, testing his weight. The brace whirred and adjusted again. I will not be falling into another pit. I'll believe that when I see it. And then I will endeavor not to prove you right. As they exited the mess hall together, Alden glanced at the others. For once, none of them looked at him like he was fragile, or improbable, or just lucky. They looked at him like someone they wanted on their team. And for now, that was enough.